Hi everyone, it's Meng from Design Plus Code. So it's been a while. I'm in Singapore right now, so my life has changed a lot over the past few months. I've lived for, a few decades in Canada, and we decided to move in Singapore. And now I'm in this balcony where I work here every day. So I have my Mac setup here. I have my new camera, which is the Opal, which I wanted to try, and it's pretty awesome. So the quality here is from the Opal camera C1. I have a new microphone. So this is the DJI. Yeah, it sounds like I'm trying to sell stuff, but I'm not. Okay. I just wanted to give you guys news about what's going on with me and how life has changed. Who am I as a designer now? I mean, it's been a while, right, that I started DesignCode. And yeah, hopefully the stream is working well. The sound is good. I haven't done this in a while, and I hope to do this more, especially with this new project. So DesignCode UI is a long time coming, right? I mean, I should have done that a while ago, to be honest. And I can't believe that I just started doing that because it makes so much sense. We teach design to developers and to beginners, and we also teach uh, code to designers and beginners. So it just makes perfect sense to start a UI kit in which it's coming from the mindset of someone who designs in code. Um, But most importantly, I think design tools in general have become so sophisticated. I mean, when I first started designing, we were all using Photoshop, and then we moved to Sketch, and Sketch made so much sense because why would you do everything, in a graphics oriented design where, everything is kind of not code friendly? And then suddenly we all moved to Sketch, which is all code friendly. It's all using properties that you would find in CSS, for example. And then Figma came along. I mean, Figma changed the game completely. Um, and Figma has matured so much over the past few years. I mean, everyone is using Figma. Everyone I know now uses Figma. And Figma has this amazing tool, which is the ultimate collaboration, right? If you think about Figma, you think about collaboration. And I think that's really what sets it apart with any other design tool is, if you look, for example, just looking at this file where I launched DesignCode UI and I share a preview to the design system, this is a file that I work on a daily basis. And just to give you proof, I can go to version history, and this is all me doing saving and, working and all the history. There's no one else. So I started all of this by myself. I wanted to be super consistent because at the end of the day, when you start a design system, you want to be consistent. You want to come from a place of um, understanding how every piece fit together from the start. And for me, while I love my team and I think it's great to have a team backing you up, at the same time, at DesignCo, we uh, knowingly decided to hire a lot of starting like designers who are basically starting out, and they're they're getting really strong with UI. But design system is another game. Is a game that requires a lot of technical knowledge where you need to know where your design fits in the whole spectrum of everything. So we're talking about, you know, how do you do the typography, and how do you set the styles? How do you set the color system? How do you set um, the gradients, the color style, the priorities, the different assets, and the structure of the text content? All of these things that comes with experience, and it's the key difference between a junior designer and a senior designer, because a junior designer can do really, really good and cool designs. But when you peel the layers, this is where the experience is showing, where they don't name their layers, or they don't do auto layout, or they don't do styling, they don't do variables, they don't do breakpoints, all of these things that are minute details that makes a design system tick. Because if you don't do this in advance, the time that you don't prepare in your design system is the time that you will be spending in code, which can be exponentially harder, because when you do in code, then making changes, then you have to come back to the design, and then we'll go back to the code. So there's a lot of back and forth when you don't think these things through. But also, ultimately, a lot of designers don't code. So what do you do if you don't code? Well, you want to spend all your time on the design system. And believe me when I say this, the design system is what makes a coder. So if you understand the design system, you understand coding from a logical standpoint. Okay, so if your design system is well done, then you understand from a logical standpoint how to implement that to a website like DesignCode IO. So DesignCode IO is essentially just minimal effort in Framer after the design system is all organized. And it sounds like a lot of work, but it's not. 90% of my time was spent on the design system, thinking about, okay, how everything is going to be adaptive. So let's give you a little demo here. Okay, so we have all of these components individually. They're all setting up to have a min-max size, and it's all using auto layout. So if you resize everything, it's a bit slow right now. I'm doing a live stream, but it's all fitting together the same way you would do in CSS. So you have to prepare all of this in advance, and you can do that as a designer of codes, or you can do that as part of a team where when you're going to be showing that to the developer, they're going to enter dev mode, and they're going to be like, okay, all of this makes sense. They don't need to give back to the design team extra feedback as to how to fix things to make sense for code, because everything is already set up in advance. And typically, you create a design system with the feedback of a developer. Okay, it's not something that you work in silo. In my case, it's a bit extreme because I have decades of experience as a designer slash coder, but most designers, they don't have this level of experience. They're either designers, they're either coder, and on top of that, maybe they don't know web, maybe they don't know iOS, right? Like there's so many little things that you need to know to create the whole spectrum for the product. So if you look here, everything has been prepared. And so I'm going to switch off dev mode. And for example, I set up the artboard, and here with the new variables, I'm going to show you the variables. So let's start from the basics, right? And for this to happen, I had to do a lot of research. And by the way, this is new to a lot of designers, not just me. I see that my avatar here is a bit high. Okay, it's fine. Okay, so not just me, but also to a lot of people, because variables is new to the design tool. Okay, but what you need to understand is variables has been around for decades in code. Like this is how we code applications. Okay, and basically, I used to say this 5 or 10 years ago, but design tools are catching up to code, basically. And of course, code is getting more powerful, but when I first started in Photoshop, we didn't have constraints. We didn't have all of these like styles and textiles and all that stuff. And eventually we got that. We didn't have plugins, and eventually we got that. We didn't have auto layout. Eventually, we got that. But you have to understand that auto layout was there in Xcode and CSS for so many years. But now we're reaching to the point where, the design system is almost at the same level of code. And that is really exciting, okay? It's really exciting because then we have the same power, and we are preparing designers to be real coders. Even though they don't do code, they will be able to understand the same language as developers. So going back to the variables, we have um, starting with the primitive, okay? So what are primitives? And I did a lot of research. I watched the design system videos from Figma. I also have been using the iOS UI kit for a while, so I kind of understand this. Personally, I haven't been in a big team of like 10, 20 designers with 50, 100 developers. So I can only speak from a point of view of experience as a designer who code, but also as someone who has done research recently in this topic of how people use design system. So everything in your variables are what we call a design token. And by the way, if someone can come in and correct me, feel free to do so. I'm happy to always be corrected. But everything here is a design token. And why would we call that a design token? Is because all of these values that we are so used to, the hex color value, the padding, the color names, and all of these things, well, those are highly specific values that only come into play for certain CSS properties, okay? And because they're so highly specific and contextual, they cannot be used as a design token. A design token is more universal, is a name that has a very specific naming convention. For example, you cannot have a period in this name, and typically you don't have a space, and typically you would use a dash instead of a space. So that's why we have these design tokens that are named as variable names, and then they each hold a value that can have different types of value. So we have colors, we have spacing, we have even instances, and basically that's what the variables is all about. We're all coming together as designers and coders using design tokens, and every time that we change the design system, we change uh, automatically all the nested elements that ultimately go and change the website itself. So that's kind of like the gist of it. Okay. So we start with so there are many types of design tokens. We start with the primitive, which basically are the basic colors for your entire application. Now, this is highly specific to each design because it's highly specific to the branding, because we cannot use all the spectrum of millions of colors, millions of spacing and rules. Instead, we're drilling down into a specific number. Maybe we're getting from millions to hundreds of colors, hundreds of sizes. So we have colors, and then we have the groups, and then we have the name, and then we have the strength of the color. So 50 would be more light, and then 900 would be darker. And the reason why we have these different uh, different sort of like degrees of colors is because typically you would start in the middle for the primary color, and for the more neutral colors, so typically the background and something that is less of calling for attention, is when you get into the darker, like the 50 or the 900, and sometimes it get even darker. So the more you want to call for attention, the more you want to go in the middle. And so, and the more you want it to be neutral, the more you want to go into the extremes. And so that's kind of like the gist of the colors right now. For example, you have the purple here. If you want a background color for your purple, then you go to the 900. Likewise, for the light mode, you would go to the 50. Now, if you want a color for the button, then you go to the 500. If you want to go for the dark mode of the same color, you go to the lighter one, so the 400. And And then you also have the active state, the selected state, the hover state. So you would change slightly to 400 or 300 depending on where you were before and what you have not used and all of these things, right? So that's how you use colors. And then you go into the sizes. Now, sizes are also super important because for the longest time, especially for beginners and developers, they have troubles with padding, spacing, visual hierarchy. Spacing is extremely important. If you look at websites that were done 20, 30 years ago, spacing was horrible, okay? But now we have standards everywhere. But most importantly, most people use the 8-point grid or the 8-point soft grid, aka the 4-point grid. But also, why do we use this? The reason why we use this is because you don't want to have inconsistency and you don't want to have the burden of choice. You don't want to have so many elements. You don't want to have like uneven numbers because uneven numbers are hard to divide into smaller numbers, but also it's confusing, right? When you have too many choices, it becomes very confusing to developers. Okay, which one should I use? So then you have to kind of like get down to less choice and what are more commonly used in spacing. So for example, it's very common to use the 8 spacing, the 12 and the 16. I think 8 and 16 are the most commonly used in design right now. And typically they're used for the padding for the containers or the padding, so the bleed edges of the screen, okay? But then you get into the smaller element, and this is where you need smaller values, because if it was just about the sides of the screen and the sides of the container, then we don't really need to drill down into the 4-point grid or even the half numbers. Now, the reason why we need the half numbers, so the half equal 2, 1 equal 4, 2 equal 8, 1 half equals 6, is because of the buttons. And you don't want to get the buttons. So I'm going to go into the buttons, right? The buttons are smaller, okay? And they need more care into the spacing. You can't just go and start with a spacing of 8. It would be too different of a spacing, and you would have to have like a very specific style of buttons that are not necessarily fit into every single application possible. If you look at the Mac, for example, and especially for desktop application, and even more so, what I noticed as being in Asia and Singapore is that applications, the sizes of text and spacing are much more minimal in Asia than it is in the West. So there's also a difference of mentality, a difference of culture, a difference of usability, where we need to all agree together internationally on a common system in which it makes sense for everyone. Okay, so to summarize, going back to that idea of sizing, you start with the 8-point grid, and then the bigger the number, the more you need it for the larger elements. Okay, so the bigger the number, the larger the elements. Those are the basic proportion rules, the visual hierarchy rules. The bigger the text, the bigger the spacing between the text. The smaller the text, the smaller the spacing between the text. The same for the screen. The bigger the screen, the more spacing that you have at the bleed. Yes, this is live, by the way. Um, the smaller the elements, such as the container, then you have the smaller element, the smaller spacing, and then you get into the buttons, then you have the half numbers. Does that make sense to everyone? Hopefully it does. So going back to primitive, these are the numbers you don't really want to change. You agree with your team once, you sit on a meeting, hopefully not a long meeting, but you agree with the basic brand values, the basic colors, you agree with the point system, and if you need half or not. And most likely you would have the same spacing rules as me. Maybe you don't need halves, that's fine. Maybe you won't have the same red colors. Maybe you don't need the orange one. That's fine. But essentially, you would come into the same system of naming convention, the name of the color, and then the strength of the color and the neutrality of the color. Does that make sense? So that is the primitive. Now we're gonna get into the contextual values, such as spacing. As I mentioned before, this is where you will change a lot based on the context of what you're trying to build. And also, these values will have to reference the primitives. Everyone on the table has to agree, once you have the primitives, now you have to agree that we all need to reference those primitives. But because once you change, the primitive is going to affect every single element afterwards. And it has to be very clear from the beginning how the system works and how the change of each value affects two smaller elements. So what we call now the semantics is the context of which those primitives will be used. Okay, what once used to be color red, now we need to say button active or button primary. And the same with the sizes. What was once a size 7, which 7 multiplied by 4 is, if my math is not wrong, is 28. Then you reference that number and then you kind of like scale it up based on the size of your button. And also you notice that we have the context of the size. So for example, the size is for the button, but you can also have the gap for the button, but you have a different gap for the container. And each has to be grouped so that the name of the container is going to affect the name of the sub-elements. So it's not just going to be named gap, it's going to be named container dash gap, container get dash padding large. And then you reference the point system. And the reason why we reference the point system is that we don't want to come in and put like a specific number like 99 or 23, and that's going to be a headache. Then you're going to end up having so many different values and a lot of inconsistency. So it's better to really like limit the choices of your designers and developers into what is possible and what is not possible, as long as that choice is clear and gives enough flexibility for your design system. Okay, so this is the spacing. You have the button, the container, and then you have the content. So again, based on what I explained earlier, the button, the smallest element, the container is the medium element, and the content is the largest element. And then you have the extra large element, which is the screen. The screen is the biggest element because, like you said, like I said before, you have the padding. The iPad is highly different from the mobile, and the iPad, if you look at, or the desktop, looking at the website, there's a ton of spacing. And you look here, you don't want to get overwhelmed with too much content. And typically, the spacing for the desktop is much bigger top and bottom than the spacing on mobile. So for example, if I switch to mobile, now you see I have less spacing, and I switch to even smaller, so I have less spacing. Notice that the navigation bar went from 40 from the top to 20 to 20. So this is 20 and 40. And then if you go into even smaller number and smaller size of the device, then you get into 20 on the sides instead of 30. And everything has to be aligned. And those are basic rules of design. You need to align everything. You need to, give a sense of order. You need to give a sense of, okay, you know, you want the eye to be not overwhelmed. You don't want to give too much information to the user. You want to guide the eyes to the proper space and give them what they want and how they wanted to use it. So you have to say, okay, when they land on this page, what do you want them to feel? what do you want them to look at? Okay, so that's why we have a bit of animation, we have a bit of like, you know, size in text, spacing between elements. As I mentioned before, the spacing between these elements are much bigger than the spacing between these elements, and much bigger than the spacing between the elements inside the buttons. And so those are like into degrees of values, and eventually it all makes sense. And when you look at this in your heart, you know, even though as maybe as beginner, you don't know why, but in your heart, instinctively, your brain is able to digest all of this information instinctively, easily. Think about like the the New York parking sign, right? It's really hard to read because there are so many rules and conditions and so many elements stacked next to each other. It's overwhelming, and that's exactly what you don't want. And who understands parking, right? Nobody, because the design is horrible. But you don't want that. And that's why we have these rules into place. And if you think about it, a design of a website is way more complex than a parking sign. And yet we managed to come to a point where we can understand how to navigate a website, how to operate this huge intelligence that is able to change every facet of our lives. I mean, think about it, right? Designing a website is not easy, and yet we're able to do it as designers and as developers. And so that is the exciting part of being able to do all of that in Figma and Framer. So, hopefully it all makes sense. I try to explain all of these things so that it makes sense to everyone, regardless of the level of experience that you have. And so, you know, I take the challenge myself, to think about all of these things, and to this is a responsibility for me as a teacher. But I mean, when I say teacher, I think everyone has to teach. A lot of seniors, developers, and designers have to teach. They have to go in front of everyone and share their experience. And this is part of the game, regardless if I have courses or not, which I do. But regardless if I do, um, we all need to get there as seniors designers, because this is a responsibility. We have a responsibility to do things right, to not do things wrong, to not confuse people, because our audience, regardless if are the users or the team members or the stakeholders in the company, we design for everyone. We design for everyone, and this is all part of the experience of being a designer. So once you master all of this, eventually you can build any product, and you can be successful at any design team, whether small or big. You can work at big companies like Apple, or Figma, or you can work at small company like, like a startup, and building your own product, which is being very commonplace nowadays. Okay, so design system, that's the gist of it. And now we're gonna look into the breakpoints and how you wanna manage everything. So once you have the design system set up, the variables, you want to apply to every single element. So for example, every single color is mapped to those semantic color. They're not mapped to uh, the primitives, okay? So all the UI that you have, when you have to tell your designers, don't use the primitive numbers. In fact, we have something called variable scoping, okay? So I'm gonna go to the primitive, and then I wanna make sure that these are not scoped into the values that the designers can select. So you can disable all of these for the fill, for the frame, for the publishing, and therefore, some of these values, they won't appear for specific elements, for the stroke, for the fill, for the text. And so this is to ensure that, we all use the right things for the right place. And so, for example, the colors here, secondary, can only be used for the text. The text element here, we cannot use the primitives in the UI. And that's basically how it works. And the same with the sizes. So now I have the padding. So now I'm using the gap for the container, and I'm using the gap for the container, and then here I'm using the spacing for the content and so on. And all of these have to be variables so that if you do change, variable can also have different mode, which is awesome, right? So variables can have different mode, and this is what makes it possible to have light and dark mode. So if you look at my colors here, I have the light colors and the dark colors. What this means is that I'm gonna go here and I'm gonna go to the layer, and this is where I can change from light and dark, and the same with the style. So let's go to dark mode. Boom, everything is changed, element by element. Notice that we're not talking about small changes here. And this took so long to create. I mean, it sounds easy because it seems easy, and that's kind of like the job of the designer, is to make it seem easy. But what happens behind all of that is actually really difficult. And this is why I created this UI kit, is so that you can reference this and look at how I did things. Well, maybe not just me, but all have other people more senior have done all of these things to make it seem so easy and effortless. But just to give you some idea, we have the whole change of the background, the wallpaper, the whole change of the gradients and you know, uh, the gradients and the color of the text, the gradients of the text. Um, and we not only have the colors that are switching from light to dark, but also we have the instant switching, okay? So you can see here the mode of each element. If I go to the component, oh, sorry, that's not what I wanted to do. I want to go to the component, and each component have variants. And those variants, basically, we're minimizing the number of variants. That is the goal. We don't want to have too many variants. In this case, I don't have a choice to have two variants between light and dark mode because I'm using gradients. But this will change soon because variables is going to become more powerful, is going to be able to support gradients. And now the reason why I'm using gradients is because it's uh like it's more like it's a step further. I'm a designer who I like to go a step further than what was done before. And this is why this UI kit, you won't see any UI kit like this anywhere else, because no other UI kit use gradients on the border. It's too hard, right? It's too different. It's too challenging. It's still too new in the design space for a lot of designers. And I take that extra effort to be on the bleeding edge of the game, and I do that with Swift UI, I do that with React, I do that with design, and this is a responsibility I take upon myself. But going back here, that's why we have a variant for all of those things. And so we have this variant, but otherwise, the reason why these variants don't have dark mode is because they all map to variables and they don't have gradients. Right now, if you use gradients, you're going to need color styles. And color styles, for example, if you want a text gradient or a border gradient, you would want to use color styles. Not just that, but also fill gradients. They're not supported in variables. But eventually, when it's going to be supported, you won't be able to you won't need to create variants. And if you think about it, having variables reduce the number of gradients. And eventually, when they're going to support typography, that's when I don't even need to use variants for buttons. The only reason why I'm using variants for buttons here is because typography is not yet supported for variables. I cannot set the text size for the buttons, and I cannot use the same text styles, the same text size for the small button versus the large button. So this is more like a button for mobile, and this is more a button for desktop. Mobile, as you know, the size is for the touch, 44 typically for the size, and for desktop is typically between 28 to 36. So you have the smaller one, you have the bigger one, the medium, and the large one. Those are the typical size for the web. And I put all of everything, I prepared all of that so that it makes sense. We have the industry standards, but that's why I did it this way. And you know, it has to make sense, right? Like in terms of like visual hierarchy, in terms of proportions and everything. And so we're doing all of that. And by the way, you can follow this. You can open the Figma file. It's part of the website. You can go, and I should have said at the beginning, but you can go and click on preview in Figma. You're going to be able to open this, and you're going to be able to inspect everything. If, of course, if you want to like the whole file and be able to use this system for your own design, you can purchase it. And thank you if you do, because this supports the project and allows me to give you all of this beautiful content for you, but also keep working really, really hard to add more backgrounds, to add more UR components. And we're going to put the whole team from today. I'm going to have the meeting with the team, and I'm going to put the whole team, and they're going to be creating more UI for you. And so, you know, you supporting the project is what allows me to keep like creating hundreds and thousands more of these components for you. So this is what we do, and the backgrounds is changed, the colors changed, the instances change. Right now, you cannot do the instance mapping. So this is instance mapping. This is mapped to the variables. The variables can also hold a string. And so because you can hold a string such as instant, light, and dark mode, then you can map that to the variable. Therefore, the string is going to switch the component property. So light and dark mode here is mapped to the component property. Okay, the component property has a mode, and as I shown you, the mode has light and dark mode, and so I map this to the instance variable, and when I change the colors from light to dark mode, it also changed the component property. Isn't that amazing? I mean, think about it. This is something that usually only coders have to think about. But now designers, they have to think about it. Well, they don't have to, but if they want to upgrade their skills, and if they want to succeed in a big team, like in a big team like Grab or Dropbox or Stripe, they have to learn all of this stuff. And that's what separates a junior designer to a senior designer. And so it's just amazing that we can do that now, in 2023, to have all of this power inside a design tool. And when I was making this, I was like, wow, I can't believe we can do all of this stuff now. So I'm mapping this to the mode, but I'm also mapping this to the breakpoints. So now I have a variable called breakpoint, which is in screen. So now we have desktop, tablet, and mobile, and the desktop has a breakpoint value, which is mapped to the breakpoint component property. If the component property has that breakpoint, okay, then such as the perfect example is the navigation bar has a breakpoint property that is different from mobile to desktop. As you know, a navigation bar would show all of the menu items and the buttons on the right side on a desktop, but on a mobile, it would only show the hamburger menu, maybe some of the menus, and on the mobile, strictly mobile, you would have the logo and maybe the company name, as well as the hamburger menu. So those are the breakpoints, and it's all prepared for you. And now going back, and by the way, this shortcut is very useful. You click here to the element that you have clicked before, and you return exactly where you left off. So I do that a lot because, as you know, working on a design system like this is no easy feat. So there's probably pretty close to 10,000 elements that I have to play with in this project. So every element, every search and replace, every coming back and forth counts in my daily work life. So okay, breakpoint is mapped to the variable breakpoint, and therefore when I select this whole artboard and I change the screen to tablet, boom, it changes to the breakpoint for the tablet, and it all aligns things properly for you. But on top of that, if you happen to use a mobile screen, and of course I could do that as well. I you can do that here, but when you do a mobile screen, there's also like a key difference. So for example, if this breakpoint here, I have this text, okay, and it has a breakpoint value. I can also change to that breakpoint mode, or I can use auto layout using min max, and this is the more powerful ways to do it. So I can do it like this using auto layout. So this is really, really awesome, and this, like, there's so many ways to do about things, but you can see that everything works. But the key difference between mobile and the specific mobile artboard is that I'm also use scaling. So scaling, you press K and then you scale elements. You do that because otherwise it would take forever to scroll into each of those elements. And so, that's why I have a very specific artboard for mobile. But I don't have one for tablet because the tablet is very similar to the desktop one. But that mobile is very different from the desktop one. So that's why I would want to use those, like, just separately mobile and desktop. But yes, everything has been mapped in DesignCode UI, and it's really, really comprehensive. And this is just the start. We're going to add so many elements. And I already have like 46 minutes in, I believe. And I'm not even covering the entirety of the project. But like, we have buttons, we have menus, we have hundreds of elements of unique UI components. As you can imagine, so much work has been put into this. We have different modes, breakpoints for each of these elements. We have 2000. I also had to work on these icons to make sure that they're all super editable and using components. And you can press enter, and then you can change the stroke width as well right here. And we also have a very unique background system that allows you to map that to the pattern, so you can change quickly the colors, the waves, and all of these grids that I'm using for the design. So that makes your design very unique and stand out from the rest, which is very necessary in a world where there are so many templates, so many UI kits that offers the basics of design. You need elements that make you stand out more. And all of these elements, some of them are created directly in Figma. Most of them actually are created in Figma and Sketch by our designers, such as the pattern here was created in Sketch, and of pretty much the rest created in Figma. All of these lines, all of these stars, but this is created in Spline. Spline is a 3D tool that allows you to create these beautiful backgrounds, 3Ds and patterns and animations that I will soon implement into the website. Now, I do have a question in the comments that asks, okay, when pressing the buy button, it doesn't open a pop-up. Yes, The reason why is because we're using Lemon Squeezy. It doesn't have a built-in pop-up, which is available for Stripe. I haven't implemented in Stripe, and I'm still thinking about it. I think Lemon Squeezy has its own merits because it allows you to set up coupon code and all of these extra features such as its own newsletter. It's very easy to do, but as a as a different thing is that it doesn't open like a pop-up or something like that. It's different. So anyways, we can discuss about building products later if you guys want. I can keep creating more of these live streams. If you enjoy, please let me know if you do enjoy this live stream in the comments. And if you want to see more of Figma or Framer or coding, please let me know in the comments. So okay, so we have all of these patterns, we have all of these colors. I even have the guides as to how I use the colors. So typically you would use the styles. If you're using the glass style, we have three styles: style for glass, one for outline, which does not use a gradients and gradient borders and fill. And then you have the outline style that use all variables, and then you have the flat style. Okay, and then we have the text for the colors, and then you have the more traditional UI, which typically is completely flat and use colors profusely for their design, especially for the branding and so on. But design code is a bit different. It's a mix between desktop application level and web level, because if you look at the UI for design code, it can work as well for a desktop application as a um, web application, right? And it's two different style, but I try to merge the two together to make it make sense. So that's why you end up like a style that looks like this, that works for both the web and for desktop as well. And it works especially well because we have these amazing designs that are increasingly more popular, such as Stripe, but more recently we have linear, and then we have like a lot of like really cool design. And all of these design, keep in mind that they're all inspired from Apple at the very beginning. Just like me, I'm very inspired by Apple. If you look at the Mac, this is the design of the Mac, especially, right? Like the design of the Mac is glassmorphic, and it has become more and more popular to the web because the web is catching up to the Mac and to iOS. So that's why the Mac and iOS first started with the glass design, and then the Mac started with the outline. But I'm not saying this to discredit what Linear or Stripe is doing. I think we all keep pushing things that are not possible in the Mac. For example, Linear and Stripe, they would add new features such as um, gradients, for example. Border gradients are not used, I believe, on the Mac. So we are kind of like adding building blocks to each of these products that came before us. And we all add our own kind of flair and our own, you know, thinking into what was once possible. And we added those things like animations, like the 3D cards that Linear did, which again, it's really hard to tell who did first. That's not the point. The question is who did it well. And that's why I keep coming back to Stripe and Linear, is because they do things really, really well and they really care about the details, the same as Apple. And I like to compare these three as a fine example of UI design. So it's no surprise that we all inspire each other, and I take inspiration from them as well. And recently I came into this really cool, which is called the BN glass, which is someone on Twitter who came up with this concept of using a blur element. As you can see here, the blur on the navigation bar takes the color on the outline. So it's not a typical glass, which is this one. It actually is a glass that reflects on the upcoming or the closest element. So you can see that I'm starting to get the orange hue here, and I try to implement that in Framer. Okay, So that's what's up. And now we're gonna switch gear and we're gonna get into Framer because that's what I promised in the description. Because this project is not only about Figma, it's also about Framer. Because what is the point of doing a design if the design cannot be implemented, right? One of the comments that we get a lot from on YouTube is people saying, look, your design is not realistic, right? And I find those comments funny because they're semi-true, but they're not entirely true. Because at DesignCode, all our designs, I try to make them possible on the coding platform as well. And it's even more possible thanks to Framer now. As you can see here, this is the design in Framer. And this is the design in Figma, right? And if you compare the two, okay, let me switch back to light mode. If you compare to the two, they're not that different, okay? They are not that different. Why is that? Because the designer is the one doing the work. If you do your own design, you know every little detail that should be optimized for the implementation of it. Either you do that or you come up with a very comprehensive design system. But if you happen to be a solo designer, such as myself and a lot of designers in the world right now, you will eventually, especially as a side project, and especially as a side project, you will learn Framer, you will learn Webflow, you will learn CSS, you will learn React, you will learn Tailwind, and eventually you will implement your own designs. But if you prepare all of that in the design tool like Figma perfectly, then you won't have a problem. So the way we prepare Framer is basically the same thing. And keep in mind, so for example, this one, you should go to the plugins, okay? I'm gonna give you some plugins here. It's called Framer, and they have a Framer plugin called Figma to HTML with Framer, and that allows you to essentially copy and paste the entire design and apply that to Framer. So I copy this, it copied, I go to Framer, and I'm gonna go here, and I'm gonna paste it, and boom. See how amazing that is? Now, it's not perfect. I wrote a tweet about this, some tips. So for example, you still need to fix the components and the blur values. You still need to fix the absolute positioning. You still need to fix, you still need to recreate the same components. So that's why on DesignCode, I have recreated all of those components in Framer. So each of the component that you find in DesignCode, the Figma, they're all available likewise in Framer. Now the key difference is, in Framer, we also have the ability to have user interactions. So you would have the hover state, you would have the selected states, and then you have the animations. Those things, yes, are available in Figma as well, but look, if you have to choose between spending hours and days between prototyping in Figma or spend the same amount of time in Framer, which one would you choose? I'm not saying one is better than the other, but please be open-minded, because, you know, if you have a ton of experience in one thing, it's time to upgrade, it's time to expand. And so learn Framer, right? If you have already, you know, dozens of hours, hundreds of hours in Figma prototyping, why not this time try Framer? Why not this time go and create components in Framer? Go and build a website in Framer. Go and build prototyping and build animations in Framer. You would be surprised that it takes the same amount of time doing that in Framer as it takes in Figma prototyping. Just food for thought. Um, and of course, I will be creating a course on Framer very soon. It should be released in 3 or 4 weeks. But I will be working and teaching you about all of this design system, how to create that in Framer, how to create all of that animations, how to create this BN glass here, how to create the 3D cards, the animation here that we have for the 3D card. Super easy to do. The interactions, how to do auto layout, because it's all very similar, how to adapt for mobile. Someone mentioned that it doesn't work for mobile. It does. It's just that because scaling isn't possible in Framer, at least the way that I wanted to do, unless I use code overrides, I decided to just leave it at 100%. But it's not broken. It's intentional. Sure, I can go a step further and use scaling, or I can do it the same way here and use auto layout, just the same way here. As you can see, it's pretty magical. But I intentionally wanted to make it do like this because you have multiple techniques. You cannot just be, using the same technique over and over. There are just different ways to do things. As long as it doesn't look broken, you don't have that horizontal scrolling that breaks the usefulness of the user, like the way that the user use your product and all that stuff. And yes, it's possible to do scaling. It's just that you need to do code overrides, and of course I don't know everything. It's possible that you can use the styling and all that stuff, and I'm still learning some of the key details. But I just wanted to explain that it was intentional, that it was not scale. And yes, I'm happy to learn from you. I'm not saying that I know everything, but thank you for pointing it out. I encourage everyone to give feedback. If you find problems from the UI kit and the Framer, then I'm happy to fix it and to find the best way to do something. I think that's kind of like the goal. Everything single element that you see here are working, are interactive, and even like the input and the buttons, the menus, I think it's not 100% working on the website. It works perfectly. The preview sometimes has a bit of an issue with the blur backgrounds, but here it should be working well with the blur backgrounds. And what else? Yes, it's completely adaptive. And we're using CMS for the changelog. So all of this is using CMS, which is surprisingly really, really fast to do. Just to give you some context of time, one thing that a lot of people ask me is like, how long does it take to create a design system and implement the website? Now, of course, for me, I have a lot of experience. I'm usually considered faster than the typical designer, but for me, it took roughly 3 weeks for the design system to do everything. But you have to keep in mind that 3 weeks is accumulation of all the experience that I had before and all the designs that I created in the past. Okay, and this is very important to note, is that no designer ever starts from scratch. When you design something, you typically start from a system that was created before from another project. And so when I say 3 weeks or 4 weeks, I include all of the experience that I had creating DesignCode 4, creating DesignCode 5, adapting the styles from my previous designs, and applying to this. So the same way, when you do freelancing, sometimes you can say to the client, oh, it takes a day or two, but it's not true that it takes a day or two. It actually takes 5 years, 10 years to get to where you are. And that's what the client is actually paying for. They're not paying for the 2 days that it took you. They actually pay you for the decades of experience or the 5 years of experience that you have before that. All the system that you created before you that you reuse for the new project for your client and for your new design team. So it is very important to note that. So, but to give you an idea, roughly 3-4 weeks for the design system in Figma. And when I say 3-4 weeks, I include everything, all the designs, all the templates. So we have multiple templates. It's not just the design system. I had to learn everything as well. I didn't know about variables. I didn't know about breakpoints. I didn't know about the advanced feature of auto layout, instance mapping. I had to learn. So I include all of that. I don't just include like the execution. It includes, writing, like all of these writings, the tutorials that I had to write. I had to include the templates, the sections that I had to do, everything. Even the icons I had to reorganize. This took, believe it or not, took a lot more time that I wanted to take to organize all of this because it was a mess when I first started. And I had to rename every single of them so that they don't have the same name. They have like a good naming conventions. I had to apply all the variables. So yes, it's a lot of work. I don't want to brag, but I just want to give you an idea of how much time and effort it takes to create a project of this caliber. And you get all of that, basically. You get all of that when you open this, you look at how it works, and for those who purchase, thank you. You're gonna be able to take all of my experience and apply that to your project. And then we have the same for Framer. So Framer, we have all of these components. You can look how I create the 3D, how I do the code overrides for the the navigation bar, how I do the CMS, how I apply the data, how I set up the website. So you can look at all the source. And yeah, I hope that by doing this live stream, it sheds some light on this project. And as someone who teach designers for almost 8 years now, I think this really came at the right time because we've been struggling to teach these things to get people to be more constructive, more together in terms of like design and code, but also designers and developers. I don't want to hear people saying in the YouTube comments, hey, this design is unrealistic, because look, we have a design system now. It's time to come together, guys. It's time to come together and sit at the same table, negotiate, merge our experiences and work on the design system together. And yeah, like do the best product, because we're in this together. We're doing this together. We are part of the same team, the same company, and we all want the success of each other. So I'm going to be taking some questions before I end this stream. I will definitely dive deeper in a future live stream. Hopefully this gave you a bit of a crash course on the design system. And we also have the team here that is watching this live stream. So I'm someone who likes to be efficient. When I created this design system, I also had this frustration that I should be teaching design system to my designers in my team. So yeah, creating this project not only allow me to say, well, okay, we have a new product, that's great, we can help our audience, that's great, but also we can teach our designers to be even better designers and even more powerful designers. And so this is kind of like, if you will, your rite of passage to work in a big company, because most big companies will work on the design system similar to this one. And just to give you some example, I think it's important that I share some resources. So For example, if you don't know about variables, you should definitely check the variables from Figma. This is a great file. I also took a lot of reference from the base gallery, which is a design system by Uber, and also the Microsoft Fluent, also the Apple design resources. Apple typically is not super specialized on website. They don't really share their web design system, but they do share their macOS design system as well as their iOS design system, which is very useful. They also have a comprehensive human interface guidelines that you can reference, which most designers use. And there are also a number of design systems that you can find on the community. So if you just look for design system, I'm gonna give some recommendations on a lot of them. So for example, this paid one that I really like is called Untitled UI. It's really good, and it's very, very comprehensive. Also, End Design System is very good that you should definitely explore. Believe it or not, the DesignCode design system that we started, I believe 5 years ago on our first design system in Figma course, and I believe that was one of the first ever design system course made. We did it, and it's very outdated. I don't recommend looking at it, but just to give you some context, I have been doing this for a while. I was working with Pizza, who happens to be in Singapore, a good friend of mine, and he works at Lottie Files. And yeah, you know, explore these amazings. In terms of plugins, let me give you some plugins recommendations. So I save them. So I do use H-shape for the specs. So the specs is what you can find in the shadows and blur. So yes, you have some guides on the shadows, how to use the shadows, elevation, and we also have this unique system with inner glow, and you know, using a transparent background or a less opaque background, and also for the spacing, I think it's really useful to show kind of like an example of the specs, you know, the spacing and how it works between elements. So this is what I use, where I use 8 specs. I also use, let me see, I use the color guide. The color, let me see if I can get all of the lists that I saved. Yes, here. Yeah, the foundation color generator is really useful. So for those who struggle with color, I highly recommend this plugin here. This actually generates these beautiful colors. So typically in any design, you start with one color, which is the primary color. And this is typically your brand color. And for example, you know, you would use this red here. Imagine that it's not part of your design system, and you take the primary color and then you paste that right here, and then it gives you all of these variations of colors from light to the darker tones, and you have different systems such as hover state, active state, you know, the darker background, and you have the more neutral tones and the surface area, so the lighter tones. And also you have different systems. So the orbit is a system, Atlassian material color system, which most people use from 50 to 900. So for example, I paste my color, then I'm gonna get all of these color system. And then when I have that, I can create a token. Sorry, so I have the token, and the token, as I mentioned before, is the name of the change. It holds a value, and the value is going to be sent to the system, and then update the design system, which updates the website. So this is an JSON format for coders out there, but also you can use this to, you know, there are some plugins in Figma that allows you to import all the color variables using a JSON file. You can ask ChatGPT to do the conversion for you, which is what I did. And so you can also create the styles. Where is it? Oh, sorry, I shouldn't. The palette. So you can also create the palette. So now I have my palette, and I can use this as a reference in my design system where I organize all the colors and the spacing and you know, the typography. So it's always useful to have references, and it's also useful to share that on Twitter and all that stuff. So we try to do all of that, and we try to make it super easy for you to organize your own design system. So what else do I use? Obviously mockups, we use angle mockups. For the arrows, I use Arrow Auto. I also use bunch description change. This is specifically useful if you want to edit all the variants at the same time. Bulk combine as variants, so you want to select multiple components and combine that as variants. You want to find all the master components, find duplicates if you have the same names. You want to select all the instances, you want to sort, you want to check your contrast values. And by the way, speaking of contrast values, super important when you use colors. You can see here that you have the contrast values, and typically you want to have like a triple A contrast value. And so if you have a triple A contrast value, so black on this light red is great, but black on this dark red is not great. So you don't have the double A or the triple A. So you want to have a minimum of a triple A or double A contrast value so that you have enough contrast for accessibility purposes for your design system. So that's very important. So you have plugins like Stark that allows you to increase that contrast ratio. And so, yes, we have a question about when I will increase the price. Right now, I'm doing an introductory price for the design system, and it's 50% off. I'm also going to be offering this the same for Black Friday, and then after Black Friday, then it will be going back to $99. So this is very limited time, and it will start at $99 because eventually we have to increase, because it depends on how many components that we have. Right now we have roughly 300 unique components, 2,000 icons, and more than 2,000 variants. But eventually, if this project is very successful, I'm going to put my entire team on it. You can imagine that we're going to get easily into 2,000 components probably by the end of the year. And then we're going to increase to $150. So the increase of the price will probably be by the end of the year at $150. And then for the team, we have a discount. So instead of like 5 licenses, you have the price of 3 licenses. And yes, you can use that. You only pay it one time. There's no subscription fee, so you don't need to pay monthly and stuff like that. You pay it one time. All the updates. So if you pay now and we add thousands of components, it's going to be free updates. You don't need to pay for new updates. It's lifetime. And also you can use it on unlimited projects. So once you pay this, you can use this on your client project as long as you don't resell the same components, the same package that we sell, that's fine. But if you use, like, let's say, you know, your own design system and you make variations of it and stuff like that based on this design system, that's totally fine. But you cannot, for example, create your own design system from this design system and resell your own design system. That wouldn't be that wouldn't be logical, right? So yeah, so unlimited updates, introductory price, and it's gonna last until Black Friday. And then at the end of the year, we're going to have thousands more of variants and components. And at that point, we'll probably get into the 150. All right, so thank you everyone for following this live stream. I hope you enjoyed it. If you really enjoyed this live stream, you want to see more of it, please subscribe, and please like the videos and share it with your friends. Please take a look at the Figma file and see how we can, you know, give feedback on how we can improve it. If you want to support the project, please do so. It really helps creating this content and expanding this UI kit for you. So with that said, thank you so much, everyone. I'll see you in the next live stream.